Good afternoon. That's good afternoon. Much better. So we've been doing these nutrient talks here at the Mid-Atlantic meeting for quite a long time right now. I always love doing these. We kind of move the bar a little bit every year. You know, I've spent the last 20 years trying to master feeding tomatoes decently. And the one thing that has been a consistent theme every year is every time I think I have them figured out, the bar moves a little further and faster. So if you all still find feeding tomatoes to be a challenge, and I hope you do, I got to tell you, after all these years of doing it, and often doing it with just huge numbers of consultants from all the nutrient companies trying to help me along, I still find this a big challenge. Every year is different. And our previous speaker, Tim Elkner, he and I have long worked together at the Penn State Southeast Farm. And one of the commonalities, one of the discussions that he and I always have, it's the micronutrient deficiency of the year, which was what got me originally thinking about this talk. Some years it's magnesium. Other years it's manganese. Some years it's boron. And so I started trying to put all this together. Hopefully this is a coherent talk, but I want to finish up Tim's talk for just a moment because we were talking about heirloom tomatoes, which is one of my favorite subjects. And having done variety trials, I counted up the varieties about 2 years ago, and I have trialed well over 500 varieties of tomatoes. When you do varieties of tomatoes like that, and we have tastings on a regular basis, people do really odd things to you. So the concept was, what makes an heirloom tomato? I will contend it's an open pollinated variety, but it has to have a good backstory. That came from people literally walk up to me at these tastings and they pull open their jacket or their purse and they hand me an envelope and they go, shh, we smuggled these out of, and they fill in the name of an unpronounceable country, hand off, and they run off. You never see them again. And somehow they believe that will become the next variety. I can't tell you how many times that has happened. Of course, you know, you can never plant those seeds because you have no idea what's on those seeds, but they always believe that this is going to be the next most wonderful variety. So let's start talking about what they actually paid me to do here today. We're going to be talking about nutrients here. It's always good to remember what we're actually talking about when we talk about a tomato. We've got this bag of sugar water. That's really all that it is. It's a bag of sugar water. I find this concept helps a lot. We're looking at somewhere between 3.5% and 9% Brix, depending on whether it is a slicer or whether we're moving it up into a grape or a cherry tomato, when you can get some really high Brix levels. But it is indeed a bag of sugar water. An awful lot of K and P, 3 pounds per wet ton of K. So you've got a lot of potash that you're moving out. If you don't put that potash there, you're never going to get great tomatoes. And you've got to put it in place every single year. Although potash is part of our clay soil matrix, so you have to forgive me for the handful of you that are on Eastern Shore or all sand soils. You've got no potash there. If you don't put the potash there, you're not going to get it. But for even those of us on clay soils, the potash is there, but it's tied up and really tightly tied up in clay compounds. If you don't put more there, you're not going to get it back out in terms of the kind of tomatoes you want and get the kind of flavor that you're looking for. You've got a pound of P for every wet ton of tomatoes. That's a lot to move off of your farm, and if you don't have it there in highly available forms, you haven't even started to play this particular game. And all of this is in this calcium magnesium fortified membrane. This is how you would describe a tomato to an alien from a foreign planet, okay? We tend to think of them in other ways, but this is what you actually have. And then getting to our subject, you have trace amounts of sulfur, zinc, boron, copper, iron, etc. So as we build up this tomato, we need to have all of these here in balanced amounts, but also have enough of them. So I want to cover some of the basics because we always get a few new people in this or folks who haven't been in here before. And so prior to flowering, we want 5 to 6% nitrogen. And this is all by tissue test. And you know I'm an advocate for tissue testing. If you are not tissue testing starting at least 4 weeks since you've transplanted, you're not really a serious player in this game. It's very, very difficult to make this work without good tissue testing. That is another whole talk. If you would like, I'm in booth 102 over in the main exhibitors hall. I will be glad to get you information on tissue testing. But prior to flowering, you want 5 to 6% nitrogen. Don't panic if it gets up to 6.5%. I get tunnel growers in late March and early April when they're getting 6.5 and even 7 because it's been cloudy and they're fertilizing a lot, hoping that fertilization will somehow beat the fact that there's no sun. You can't do that, by the way, okay? No sun, fertilizing doesn't help. But that's okay. It'll come down once fruit is starting to set. You want your phosphorus number by tissue to be 0.8 to 1%. That's a great place to have it. That's enough to keep your vigor up. Potash at 2 to 5%. At 2, you're going to start seeing yellow shouldering. You really are looking at 3% or higher. And remember, potash is the mule that hauls sugars along inside the plant. All water relations inside this plant are based on potash. So once you get that at 3% or so, you're starting to play real games with tomatoes. And on a determinant slicer, which is going to be our model for most of this conversation, anybody can get 8 pounds of tomatoes on a determinant slicer. You can do that simply sticking it in a decent garden soil and just letting it do whatever they're going to do. We're talking about trying to get 20 pounds or more of number one fruit, good marketable fruit off the plant. That's where all these numbers come from. I think it's a worthwhile place to go. So we want at least 3% potash. I'd rather see you closer to 4 because what's going to happen is when you've got 8, 10, 12 pounds of fruit hanging on there, your potash number is going to crash. All of your soluble feeding at that point, even supplementing it with foliar feeding, which does help a little bit, all of that is going to be for naught as that plant is just mining down all that potash. You're going to fall behind. I've done it year after year. It's not terrible, but you've got to be on top of this. You want your calcium at 3% and your magnesium at 0.8 to 1%. That ratio is really important, okay? And the amount, if your calcium is much higher, you're going to suffer. Because what will happen is as your calcium goes over 4 and starts hitting 5%, it will directly compete with calcium and magnesium. These are cations, so they compete with each other. When you've got your potash at 3.5 to 4%, calcium at 3, and your magnesium at 0.8 to 1, life is good. You are in perfect balance. Except if you're a tunnel grower, and we're going to be talking about this more in the tunnel session on Thursday. If you're a tunnel grower and you haven't dealt with your salts, specifically sodium, which is the real bad salt to worry about, and you haven't dealt with your salts, you can throw all this out to kilter because sodium is also a cation. It will directly compete with your potash, calcium, and magnesium. Everything has to be in balance to make this plant work. So it's not a matter of throwing everything you want to at it. You've got tissue testing, you've got soil testing. These are wonderful tools to get you in that right zone. Trust your gut on the way there, unless your tissue test tells you otherwise. Then your gut was way wrong at that point. So this is really important. Before flowering, you want to get your potash at 3%. And although this is a micronutrient talk, if you don't do this, nothing else that you do is going to work very well at all. And your flowering starts 2 weeks before you see that first flower. So if you put the ideal transplant in the ground, it's about a 5-week-old transplant. It's about this tall, no stretch to it, very vigorous. You don't want to put a giant transplant in. And I moved away from them years ago. First off, they're a pain to handle, but a giant transplant, that 12 to 14-inch plant in a 4-inch pot, you may get your first fruit early, but that plant has already moved into a reproductive mode before you put it in. It's slowed down already, so a small, young, 5-week-old transplant is going to work a lot better. 4 weeks after you put that in the ground, it is starting to make the first flower. So you got a 9-week-old plant now. It is going to start making the first flowers, and 2 weeks later you will see those first flowers. So 4 weeks after transplanting is when you want to pull your first tissue test. You're determining what your level ground is. Everything can get set up at that point, and you haven't blown the season yet. Okay, I know how busy you guys are, and the tissue testing seems to be the one that falls away. So although this doesn't work for the video that we're doing it very well, how many of you are running an active tissue testing program right now?
How active?
And by active, hold your hands up. So starting at 4 weeks and every 2 weeks until you're looking at finishing off the last tomatoes. Well, a few hands, I lost everybody at that point. I understand. I have done this year in and year out. This is really hard to stay on top of. Tissue testing makes you money. You just have to put that in your head, is that $30 tissue test makes you money. And plus, I get a $2 kickback every time you guys do it, so it's very worthwhile. Stay on top of that. So, in order to get your numbers right at tissue analysis, you want to have put down 30 to 50% of your nutrients if you're a conventional grower. These are your granular nutrients. If you're an organic grower, you've got to put down about 80%, and the reason for that is very simple, is that on the organic side, we do not have a great bunch of highly concentrated soluble materials. On the conventional side, we've got all kinds of very good concentrates that will make all this work. And so all of these things come into play. I am a huge supporter of using tensiometers or aerometers in order to make sure your water levels are where you need them. It takes about 2 inches of water per week if the wind is not howling in order to make your tomatoes happen, in order to fill them up properly. The only way you're going to be able to figure out if all this is happening properly is if you've got the right measuring apparatus. And I realize I am subscribing to this very male attribute, is whoever dies with the most toys wins. But frankly, it's important. Having tensiometers or aerometers makes a huge difference, and learning how to use them has a lot to do with it. You want to make sure you've got enough free water without drowning the poor darn plants. And this is really important. The pH of your soil and your irrigation water, okay? If it's not in that zone of somewhere 6.2 to 6.5, if you let it drift up to 6.8 or God forbid 7.2, then none of this is going to work. Tomatoes are tough. They really will separate out whether you're a good grower from a great grower. But if you get your irrigation fertigation solution at 6.2 to 6.5, you're going to get the maximum uptake of all of your nutrients, and your life gets a whole lot better. If you let it drift a little low, well, down to about 5.8, you're safe. Below 5.8, you will find that you start running into the same problems. You may see some micronutrient toxicity as those levels start to drop at that point. So this is the zone that you're working on. And although we've talked about this in this class before, remember that your pH scale is a base 10 logarithmic scale. And all that means is it moves really quickly. The difference between a pH of 6 and 7, it's 1 point on the pH scale, but it is a 10-fold difference. So this is actually a pretty wide margin right here that you're shooting for. So, you know, I get folks all the time, they go, Steve, I've heard that you give this talk about tomatoes and pH before, and I'm at 6.8. That's close, right? No, you are way out of the zone at that point. And remember that the pH scale moves really quickly, because if you go from a pH of 6 to 8, it's not 10 plus 10, it's 10 times 10. It's a 100-fold difference. So this is a scale that moves very quickly. Working to get it here matters a lot. For most of you who are pulling water from limestone aquifers, or you are possibly even pulling municipal water, which gets buffered really high, you're probably going to have to add acid to your water. And the way you start off is take your water to a lab, get it tested for pH and alkalinity, use the AlkCalc online calculator, ALKCalc, put in your numbers, pay very close attention to the pull down menus. It will give you a very good prescription for how much either phosphoric, nitric, or sulfuric acid to use of various concentrations. Most of you are conventional growers, you're probably going to use sulfuric acid. That's the cheapest acid to use. If you are an organic grower, you're probably going to use citric acid. It's going to run your cost up a little bit, but it works really well. It takes about 9 ounces of powdered citric acid to move 100 gallons of final dilution irrigation water about 1 point. So if your pH is 7 and you're heading for 6, 9 ounces of powdered citric acid is going to take you from 7 to 6. It's going to move 100 gallons of final water. Not concentrate, but final water. So you would put your 9 ounces in your stock tank on a 1 to 100 dosatron. And hopefully everybody understands that. Or again, visit me at booth 102. I will sell you my own products while we talk about that particular thing. So, really important, your mycorrhizal fungi. So, phosphorus is the one that we run out of really quickly in the root zone. And the reason phosphorus is immobile, it does not move very well at all. And so you've got a bunch of root hairs out here. Root hairs don't go very far out into the soil. So once they deplete the loose phosphorus that's right there, your plant starts running out of phosphorus. It's the number one macronutrient deficiency that we see. You can solve this so easily. Either get your organic matter up above 3% and keep it there, because you're going to have a probably good mycorrhizal fungi, or add one of the trichoderma fungus to it. That's going to help out a lot. They will actually infect, I almost missed the word infection. They will infect the epidermis of your root sheath, and they will go much, much further out into the soil. They'll alter the pH, but they will go way out into the soil, pull phosphorus in and other nutrients as well at the same time. They'll get a little bit of photosynthate. They'll get some sugars from the plant while they're bringing in all that extra phosphorus. And so, by way of transparency, Biotam 2.0 is our version of trichoderma fungus. Root Shield Plus is the one from BioWorks. BioSafe makes Terra Grow. There are other companies that sell that stuff. And with a wink and a nod, of course, ours is the best. I'm glad you guys are enjoying my jokes so far. It's really hard to recommend other companies' stuff when baby needs new shoes. So, at flowering, we want to let our nitrogen levels drop to 3.5 to 4.5%. You just watch your nitrogen levels. It's a very natural drop. You will watch it plummet. When you have good sunny, good growing days, your nitrogen levels, unless you are overfeeding to the max, you're going to watch those numbers fall. But at the same time, you want to work to keep your potash levels above 3%. You're doing this by putting more in solubly. Fortunately for organic growers, we've got potassium sulfate. If you've got good soluble potassium sulfate, works just as well as any other conventional material, so you can keep it up. Trace amounts of foliar potash will act as there's a synergy between foliarly applied potash and injected. So doing them both, remember, small amounts foliarly, like a tablespoon per gallon, but a small amount applied foliar will actually assist uptake through the roots. You will see an enhanced uptake. Try that experiment. It works really well. It works every time. The work was originally done in cotton, and somehow the work in cotton translates really well to tomatoes. I have no idea why, but that will help. Then you're tissue testing all the time, and watch all of these nutrient levels. You will find that they change. If you get 2 good, warm, sunny weeks, ideal tomato growing conditions, it is 85 degrees, the sun comes up, it stays up all day long, and we get 2 1-inch rains during the week. They are perfect. It's perfect tomato. It's your typical day of growing tomatoes outdoors, okay? It's our typical season. We get 2 inches of rain. One of them comes Monday about midday at 2 o'clock after all the important work is done. And then a light breeze comes out of the southwest that dries the crop off. And the next one comes on Thursday, okay? You know, it's the season that we all see every week. If you get that, then all of this is going to work well. So irrigate appropriately to make that happen. So this is yellow shoulders, and this is what I get calls on all the time. No matter how many times I have talked about potash in tomatoes, we see this exact problem. This is yellow shoulders. On the outside, you will see that classic yellowing. It'll be hard and white. You can see it here in the meaty part of the tomato. In an heirloom, you can actually see a hard white core that runs down through there. This is not what we call good eats. This happens when that fruit is set. So once it's hanging, it's too darn late. You cannot fix fruit that look like this. You've got to go back 35 days on a slicer to fix this particular problem. So you start picking yellow shoulder fruit, you can get to pick all of them off and wait 35 days, assuming you have solved that problem. And so this is a really challenging problem to fix. At 6.2 to 6.5, with all the other things we've been talking about, you will see very little of this. Some varieties are really prone to yellow shouldering. Jetstar was the one I experienced first when I first started extension work 20 couple years ago. I got called out, and apparently Jetstar will do yellow shouldering. If you just whisper yellow shoulders near it, the entire crop yellow shoulders out. I don't understand why, but it gets it really bad. So varieties matter a lot. Most of the new really good determinate varieties do not do that. Dixie Red is my current favorite variety. It's amazing what a good variety is, but Red Mountain, another really good variety, they don't tend to yellow shoulder nearly so bad. So we'll start moving into secondary nutrients now. So calcium, so you want your tissue levels for calcium to be at around 3%. It's bad if it's too low, but it's also bad if it's too high. One of the things that growers have gotten used to is, because we've been fighting blossom end rot for so long, is they want to put lots and lots of calcium in, to the point that they are overdosing on calcium. And so you really got to watch your calcium numbers. I like using calcium chelate during the growing season because it's highly available without altering the pH very much, which makes an awful big difference. And we've mentioned it's got to be in balance with magnesium and potash. And so this is blossom end rot on tomato. Just because we call it blossom end rot doesn't mean it needs to be on the blossom end. You can see it anywhere on there. It is a complete misnomer, and it'll do the same thing to your bell peppers if they're out. So everything I have said about tomatoes applies just perfectly well to bell peppers, including the amounts. And one of the reasons that it translates over so darn well is that with bell peppers, you typically are planting at twice the field population. So with tomatoes, determinant types, we're usually planting them at 4,840 plants to the acre. With bell peppers, usually we're doing them on a double diagonal row at about 9,700 plants to the acre. And so that population change, doubling bell peppers, will make that work just as well, so you can feed them the exact same program as your tomatoes and prevent them from getting blossom end rot. So remember, calcium is non-mobile. It's not going to pump it out of lower leaves, unlike magnesium, which it will strip it out of lower leaves. So calcium is non-mobile. You've got to have it there all the time. It is part of your regular feeding program, which is another reason I'm so fond of calcium chelate, because you can mix it with most of the rest of your nutrient program without having it get tied up. Okay, it's not going to cause problems. It's that M&M shell that protects it, so it's not going to mix with other fertilizer or cause things like calcium phosphate, which is going to clog up your system and settle to the bottom. But you've got to have a small amount available all the time. When you're working up your soil so that you don't move your pH very much, because remember, we're trying to keep it slightly in the acidic zone, you want to look for things like I just watched, this is the problem of turning 61. I watch words fly out the door and they're not coming back in at this point. But decayed coral, which is you can get it available from a lot of the fertilizer people in here. Decayed coral is a really great source of calcium because at 200 to 300 pounds to the acre, it's highly available and it's not going to move the pH of your soil very much. Gypsum, calcium sulfate, another really good source of calcium without moving the pH of your soil. Do not lime your tomatoes unless you've got a really good reason. If your soil consultant tells you that your tomato field needs to be limed, find a new consultant. I have seen this happen way too many times. You almost never need to lime a tomato field. Aragonite was the word. This is why I put it on my PowerPoints. So aragonite is decayed coral, and it's really hard for a Baltimorean to say because it's Carl, the guy. So I'm learning to say coral doing all this. So calcium chelate and aragonite and gypsum are really good products for doing this. Calcium chelate is really good in a foliar application, so you can do a trace amount and make that needle move a little bit. And so you need to be really careful though with a lot of calciums. Calcium and phosphorus are going to form calcium phosphate. You put them into a tank together and I will guarantee you will clog up your machinery. So if you're trying to do a light foliar application and you've got calcium and phosphorus in the same tank, expect to spend a lot of time fixing your equipment. This is my disclaimer for when you guys call and complain during the season as to what you did to your equipment. I'm telling you, be really careful when you combine calcium phosphorus. In a talk that I heard earlier, they were talking about the jar test. And if you're not sure, do the jar test on it. When you start watching stuff settle to the bottom, it is so much better to have it happen in a mason jar than to have it happen in your spray tank. It takes a long time to clean all this out. So again, I threw blossom end rot because I have a lot of pictures of this in my library, so you get to see more pictures of this one. So calcium nitrate, calcium chelate, these are all sources of calcium, but you apply enough on, and the problem with all of these, ag lime, dolomitic lime, and calcium carbonate, it's the carbonate in here. The bicarbonate is going to push your pH up, which is going to make very, very difficult for you to get enough potash into your plant. So we're always making sure that we're trying to do things to keep that pH in the right zone. And you'll see there's a lot of different aragonite products down. Visit the fertilizer guys in here, they'll fill you in on using aragonite. So magnesium seems to be the big problem that I was seeing last season. I got to an awful lot of growers where as soon as I walked in the house, you could see the lower leaves of the plant were stripped out, and I'm pretty sure I have pictures of this coming up. So watch your magnesium levels. There are magnesium chelates out there, and they are the ideal way to fix the problem once you have it. And so you watch your magnesium levels dropping by tissue analysis. There are both amino acid based chelates, and there's also your typical EDTA chelates. So whether you're organic or conventional, there are chelates out there available. Remember, we're shooting for 0.8 to 1. When we say calcium deficiency causes blossom end rot, what we're really saying is that having an imbalance and deficiency of calcium and magnesium is what causes blossom end rot. You can get blossom end rot just as quickly if your magnesium's out of kilter. You will see it just as bad. It is not just a calcium deficiency. It's what we've gotten used to. It's the language that we have it all used to. So what you're going to hear, I just keep pushing that balance. You want to have enough of this. So these are our sources of magnesium. Epsom salts is the easiest and cheapest way to get your soil ready. I put 30 to 100 pounds to the acre. I have put down 150 pounds of Epsom salts just to make my life easier. It's very inexpensive, but you've got to put it down at the very beginning of the season. You're not going to fix a deficiency of magnesium by applying any of the Epsom salt products. I do not care how it has been concocted, but you're not going to fix a deficiency in the growing season with a liquid magnesium sulfate because the magnesium's just not available fast enough. This is a plow down product that you use at the beginning of the season. You can blend it with your potting media if that's the way that you're growing, but you're not going to get that immediate fix. There you need a magnesium chelate to make the fix. This is the easiest way to go, magnesium chelate. Magnesium citrate and magnesium oxide are very good products. They're a little harder to get though. And I know magnesium oxide, folks tell me it's very high pH and challenging to get it to make it soluble. I've talked to some of the fertilizer manufacturers, so most of the time we are going for an EDTA chelate of magnesium, or if you're organic, an amino acid based chelate of magnesium. For plowdown, Sulpomag is one of my favorite ways to go, and the reason in there is we've got potash in there, and we're going to talk about sulfur more, but you've got sulfur, you've got potash, magnesium in a really easy to manage formula. It's highly available, and it solves most of your problems, and it fits under an organic regimen, so it's available for everybody. And Ken, I have no idea where I am on time. So this is what a magnesium deficiency this is what a magnesium deficiency looks like. I saw it all over the place last year. This was a very consistent theme, and what happens is once that plant starts making fruit, it will start mining out the lower leaves. That's a finite thing. At one point, it can get no more out of the lower leaves, and you're just going to find you're going to start seeing all kinds of deficiencies on it. The plants will lighten up. Magnesium is really important in photosynthesis, and obviously you're going to see blossom end rot, as we've talked about. So, sulfur. This is when you say something tastes like a tomato, you are actually describing hundreds of sulfur compounds that the plant makes. And so sulfur used to be a real easy nutrient for us to get hold of. It came from the burning of dirty diesel fuel. Okay, so as all the dirty diesel tractors and semis were running around, they were fertilizing our fields for us and providing lots of sulfur. Well, now that we only burn low sulfur diesel and coal plants are largely going by the wayside, it's not unusual to see a sulfur deficiency. Most soluble fertilizer companies will add some sulfur in. So make sure you're reading these labels as you do it. So this is another secondary nutrient. While I put it in the family of micros because it's not NP or K, 0.8 to 1.2%. It takes a lot of sulfur, and this is when folks come to you, and I hear this a lot because people will tell me that occasionally people will tell me, Jonathan, that their Mountain Fresh tomatoes taste fabulous. Okay? And folks brag to them that they're Mountain Fresh, and they don't know that they're Mountain Fresh at that point, but that their tomatoes taste amazing. That is because there's an actual lot of sulfur in their tomatoes, and that gives them that really classic red tomato flavor. All those acids that make up that balance there, those are sulfur compounds, and that's what makes a tomato. So you're going to see a lot of this in things. So again, sulfomag, potassium sulfate, magnesium sulfate, ammonium sulfate, and sulfuric acid. So if you are modifying your irrigation water, as a lot of us need to do by using sulfuric acid, you're probably applying enough of it. The way you're going to know is you tissue test, and you're going to know whether you're in the zone for sulfur. It's a very easy compound to manage. It is seldom a problem, but it can be a limiter in terms of production. So this is what a true sulfur, you have to work to get this kind of a sulfur deficiency, okay? This takes a lot of work to get to this point, but you can see sulfur is obviously important in photosynthesis because look how bleached out those leaves are. So boron is one that we learned about a number of years ago in tomatoes, that it was a real limiting factor. It has a lot to do with the growing point of your plant, and so many soluble manufacturers starting added boron to it. You will see boron in just about everybody's formula right now, to the point that it's not unusual to see boron levels of 300, 400 parts per million, and yet we're shooting for 50 to 75 parts per million. This is the one that's ringing alarm bells with me right now, this is the one that it's very, very easy to see boron toxicity. I have seen folks that just burn up their crop, and it will burn up your leaves at 300 parts per million. These plants will shut down. So you want to be very, very careful. If you are one who likes to shop between manufacturers and you're buying a bag from one and a bag from another, make sure that you're not triple or quadruple dosing on this tiny amount of boron that you need. Follow these tissue numbers really carefully. When you're in that zone, everything is good, and even up to 125 parts per million, you're going to be okay. Once you start hitting 200, you're going to start watching problems. You're going to start seeing your leaves start to burn up. And so as you get them right, you'll see reduced fruit cracking, especially those little tiny cracks that you see coming off the top of the calyx end. Those little tiny cracks are often related to boron, and it's going to reduce uneven ripening when you get it in this right zone. As you get it over, you're going to start to limit other nutrients, especially manganese is going to throw that way out of balance. So typical sources to your soil, and look how low we're talking about. Like Solubor, a half to 1 pound acre annually is plenty. An acre and a half is not the worst thing. I did some work at the Penn State Southeast Farm last year where we put 1.5 pounds in for potatoes because I was trying to reduce hollow heart on potatoes. It was not the answer. Okay, 1.5 pounds of boron was just simply not the answer to hollow heart, and the only reason I put that in this room is because I'm not giving a potato talk, so you guys get the pleasure of that. I'm still trying to figure out hollow heart. So borax and Solubor, the same thing. Be very careful with boron. Watch your numbers carefully there. And so this is a boron deficiency, where you're starting to see curling of the leaves, bleaching, etc. It's really hard to recognize it without a tissue test, okay? Sulfur, magnesium, calcium are much easier to recognize. This is actually a shortage of boron.
Where did you pull that off? In the lower leaf or is it mid-leaf?
That is a midleaf. That's a midleaf. So this is copper. So copper we very seldom see deficiencies of. And the reason I put this on here, excuse me, that was for the sound guys, not to blow their ears out while I coughed. So copper is one because we apply so many copper fungicides. This is all we're looking for is 20 parts per million. Our soils have virtually no copper in them. I have yet to find a soil in the East that had any copper in them. So it's not unusual if you're not doing anything to see levels of 6 parts per million. What you will see at low levels is your plants seem to have a greater susceptibility to diseases. It's the best thing I can figure out. I'm pretty sure I put a picture in here that goes along with this, but as you get your numbers up, your plants will actually become tougher and able to resist diseases, especially bacterial diseases to some point. It's not unusual to see copper levels of 1,500 parts per million, because we're applying a lot of copper fungicides. So in order to actually figure out how much is in your tissue, request that your lab wash their leaves, okay, when they go in. So you want to write on there, applying copper bactericides or fungicides, wash leaves please. So you want to make sure obviously you're getting a fresh sample in, because it's hard to wash old crinkly leaves. Do not try washing it on your own. I am told that I have tried this, and the labs say, we stink at washing copper off of leaves, okay? They have special ways that they do this. They are using distilled deionized water. They seem to have a different way of doing this. I have yet to see a lab that charged for this service. They would rather get you good results. So if you are applying copper fungicides, make sure you put on there, please wash the leaves before they do it. Oh, apparently I don't have a good picture of a copper deficiency. It's really hard to induce an actual copper deficiency. So iron is really important in photosynthesis. I often will see iron deficiencies, and so this is the ability to metabolize sulfur and nitrogen. You've got to have it there in a balance. This is part of the reason we like the pH on a little on the low side, 6.2 to 6.5, because iron is going to be more available at that range. As the pH goes up, iron becomes a lot less available. This is high soil and water pH can reduce the uptake of this particular one. So we're looking at tissue levels of 100 to 300 parts per million. Many soluble fertilizers have got that iron in there. Again, read the label, make sure that you are balancing that. Iron chelates are really common. Ferrous sulfate is almost common. If you are growing in potting media, you may have to be injecting iron chelate or ferrous sulfate, because the media just doesn't hold on to iron very well at all. But it's not unusual to find some iron in a lot of fertilizers. And you can see this deficiency. Iron is really important, again, in basic photosynthesis, so you get this basic bleaching of the leaf, especially very near the petiole. It's going to bleach out on you. Zinc is a really interesting one. So in tomatoes, zinc is not so big a deal. So I am not in the sweet corn talk, so I'm going to throw this out into this one. If you grow sweet corn, consider applying 8 to 12 ounces of zinc chelate to your sweet corn. You will often be able to pick a reliable second ear on your sweet corn, just because we see deficiencies, and this is the way to get over that particular deficiency. A zinc chelate at 8 to 12 ounces will often get you that next ear. You don't see it often in tomatoes, but it takes a very small amount to do that. Our soils are deficient. It looks really similar to iron deficiency, except your leaves start to die at this point. This would, if I went into a house without a tissue test, I would swear that somebody had sprayed too much mancozeb or had done chlorthalonil indoors, because that's the kind of deficiency that it looks for. But this is indeed a zinc deficiency. This is at about 5 parts per million, where you're actually seeing the leaves are dying at this point. It is, again, really important in basic photosynthesis. So apparently I felt the need, as I had the flu the other day, to put potash back in again to wrap up this particular talk. We've talked about potash a lot. We've talked, I think I talked about this in the beginning. This is what happens when you do the flu and try and do a talk. I talked about this in the very beginning of this. Let me read this through real quick, make sure we're not covering everything. Nope, we're in good shape here. So this is an important slide. This tells you what actually is in a tomato. This is hard information to find. I had to do a lot of hunting around to find that, but per pound of tomatoes, this is what you find inside this is what's inside a healthy tomato, and you will see the vast majority of that is potash, with smaller amounts of everything else. And any of you who want this presentation, all you have to do, my email is going to go up at the end. You send me a message, I will convert this to a PDF and send this back to you, or a couple of you I see taking pictures of it, you are welcome. Did you get your picture, Ed? Good, okay. Foliar application. The vast majority of nutrients are not available to plants foliarly. Overwhelming amounts got to go in through your root system. Have a healthy root system. Make sure you're feeding it appropriately. But trace amounts are available foliar, and it matters. It really makes a big difference when you're trying to go from 20 pounds to 22 pounds, 25 pounds, 30 pounds. It matters, those foliar nutrients. Very small amounts. Do not burn your leaves as you hunt for this particular thing. Kelp meal, an amazing source of micronutrients. So this is the amount of sulfur, calcium, magnesium, sodium. You can see you've got a real neat amount of all these. What I really like about kelp meal is, first of all, it's really inexpensive. Kelp meal typically $15, $18 per 50 pounds. I see some Fertrell people here. Are you nodding your heads when I say that? Not nodding your heads. You're not helping me at all. Thank you very much. And so 450 pounds, 500 pounds to the acre is a good rate. The only thing I will tell you is it's a real pain in the butt to apply. Applying kelp, it does not flow, it does not spin, it is dusty, it is nasty. I would do this once every couple years and remember how nasty the job was as you were doing it. Dry dairy manure has got a good bit of micronutrients in it, and so if your soil's not overwhelmed with phosphorus, it's another good way to go. And there's lots of good micro mixes out there that will get you in the right zone. Some companies put out very specific micros. Some of them you have to get them all blended. If you've got specific shortages, then go look for them. Do not apply a whole lot of extra micro just because it was easier to do. Oh yeah, have a great season, and this is how you get hold of me.
Steve, a hand?
Do I have time for a question or two? Okay.
Yeah.
Questions
One or two?
or answers?
Or answers, yeah. All right, we got one here, and then we're going to hold. Go ahead, right here.
You mentioned right at the beginning of the talk about the root zone, especially in the start. I'm sorry. You mentioned early in the talk about the root zone. Do you have a recommendation on the drip irrigation? How far out? You know, like 3 inches, 8 inches, 6 inches.
That is a wonderful question. So first off, I would much rather with tomatoes do a double row. The best growers now are running 2 lines of irrigation. And so rather than a single half a gallon per minute line, run 2 quarter-gallon lines and put them 6 or 8 inches off of each side. You're going to pull your root system out more. Remember, indoors or in a dry season or under plastic, that root system is pretty well tied to your drip line. It's not going more than about 10 inches out. So when you have 2 lines out there, you're going to pull the roots out further. It's going to be able to mine more of the soil that you have. It's a lot greater buffering capacity, and you are going to make that plant function that much better.
Just to follow up, like I say, put that in the zone at that area.
So the question is about mycorrhizal fungi. And so if you run it through the drip line, and almost all the products that I mentioned, our Biotam, Root Shield Plus, TerraGrow, all of them you can run through the drip line. They're going to get exactly where you need to go. But I would always inoculate your plugs before you put them out. Okay, that way you're starting off. One more question, right?
Yeah, actually, I'll take another one because he had answered the question. So one more. Okay, right here.
You said that getting the calcium too high can cause an imbalance. Is that the same for potassium? Can you go too high?
Okay, so the question is about calcium and potash going too high. While I got my calcium up to 5.25%, and therefore I couldn't get my potash up, I've never been able to do the reverse, where I've got my potash so high where it outcompeted other ones. It's really hard getting your potash up. I assume that one of you who wanted to prove that point could probably do so, in which case you can give this talk next year if you explain how you did that. I don't know that it works in reverse. It's really hard to do.
You mentioned dry dairy manure. You're talking about separated dairy or pen pack, or what do you mean?
Do I look like a dairy farmer to you? I know that when you take dairy manure and you dry it down and somebody publishes a paper on what's in it, those were the numbers they put out. The problem is that was not a dairy farmer who did that. That was one of us. And we look at cows as things to eat. Guys, thank you all very much. Enjoy the show. Come visit me.